just waiting for him to hit the record button. All right, here we go. All right, welcome back to the Tuddle Daily Podcast, guys. I don't get excited for a lot of interviews that I have, but this one I'm really extremely excited for because in broadcasting, in your career, there are those handful of people that you meet that make a difference in your life, that make a difference in what you want to do for a living. And my passion is radio and podcasting. And my next guest on with me right now, and I don't even know what to call him, but Michael Sharkey.
There you go.
Should I call you Shark? Because we all called you Shark when you were the PD.
You know, I think you can, I will answer to almost anything. But I will tell you that over the course of the last 5 to 7 years, less and less people call me Shark and more people call me Michael. But I always respect how our relationship began. So because it's Shark and Tuddle, then feel free to call me whatever you most are comfortable with.
Now, Michael, I want to talk about this. So first, before we get into all of my questions and stuff, sure. What is it that you're up to right now? I've noticed that you're kind of being, would you say, I don't want to offend you, would you say you're almost like a podcasting consultant right now?
Well, my business is called Your Podcast Coach. And I always try to think of the negative connotations that sometimes exist around the word consultant. And I find that most of the work that I do with people is coaching them. And if you go back to the work that you and I did inside a radio station, or the work that I did with most everyone inside a radio station, that was very much of a coaching relationship, encouragement, guidance, things like that. So I really just kind of took all of that knowledge set of years and years and years in broadcast radio and thought, well, why don't I apply that to, real people and real stories? And when I started in 2015, I would say, hey, I'm a podcast coach or a podcast consultant, however. And people would always go, what's a podcast?
Man, that is crazy. That is so crazy that it's weird how new technology and new platforms develop, because some of them catch a little bit more fire, but podcasts have been around for a while. Now, what is some of the big differences? Okay. Because, a lot of people that don't know what you've done, with your work at 97X, I mean, everybody was talking about the programming you did there. You took a lot of risk. You took a lot of risk on playing new music and stuff, taking risk when it came to talent. What have you been able to take from radio, terrestrial radio, to the podcasting platform? And does everything carry over, or is it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I think the biggest answer to that question is recognizing first and foremost that they're very different mediums. They're very different mediums, but in many ways, the core essence of the experience is the same. So, very much in radio, everything is timely. Everything is, okay, we got to talk about this bit today because tomorrow it's not good and blah, blah, blah. Whereas podcast, you really want to create something that somebody could discover you today. They could discover you 2 years from now, and it can carry a lot of that same weight. I think a lot of the lessons that are the same are, what are you doing? What are you saying to gather somebody's attention? How can you craft and make your 20-minute podcast, 30-minute podcast really sort of compelling from the beginning to the middle to the end? And, instead of working with talk show hosts and radio personalities, now I get to help people craft whatever their story is. And most of the people I work with are business owners and entrepreneurs, but invariably an entrepreneur is just somebody who is following through on the passion that they have with whatever they chose to do and helping them sort of craft that in that audio experience. So to kind of answer your question, they are different, but at the same time, a lot of truths and a lot of insights and a lot of wisdoms do stay the same.
Okay. Now, have you found out, you've been doing this since 2015 with this pandemic going on? Do you feel like a lot more people have tried their hand when it comes to podcasting right now because they're stuck at home? Maybe people want to, relay their experiences and stuff that they're going through right now. Have the trend shown that a lot more people, amateurs maybe that have never even thought about doing it, are getting into doing podcasting more?
Absolutely. Yeah, the pandemic was a huge thing for podcasts. I mean, it's like if you go to Google Trends and you research the term podcast or how to start a podcast, you will see, like, even right now as we're doing this in December of 2020, it's at the 100 out of 100 level on Google Trends. I mean, podcasting right now is really, really hot, but it peaked. You can look at where it sort of skyrocketed in April and May of 2020. And a lot of people, and it's kind of become almost and I forget who wrote the book, but somebody's got a book right now called Everyone's Got a Podcast But You. And I think it's kind of this sort of like tongue-in-cheek way of looking that everybody has started a podcast. So I think what's happening right now is you've got this wave of people that are kicking the tires, giving it a shot. But you see half of the people that start a podcast never get past the 6th episode.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is they're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. I did an interview with a woman last night in Australia. And, when 2015, she started her podcast, went all in, didn't last. Now she's come back to it, much more consistent, much more level about it. But at the same time, it's just a lot of people are kicking the tires. But in this process, at least for me, what I'm discovering is I'm still helping people craft ways to start and answering all the technical questions. But now I'm getting a lot of people who are like, hey, I really like this, but I want to get better at it. I want to create better content. I want to do better stories. So I'm noticing a shift in my people that I work with from, hey, what's a podcast, to I've been doing it. I'm 90 episodes in. How do I get better at telling stories? How do I get better at crafting content?
Right now on the Tuddle Daily podcast is one of my former program directors, Michael Sharkey. Now he is a podcast coach. Now, Michael, if people wanted to get in touch with you, how can they do that? Like, if they're interested, they're wanting to go all out. Maybe they got a business or a product that they're wanting to promote, and they feel like, going in the direction of going a podcast direction. How can they get a hold of you?
So I offer a free workshop on my website. All you got to do is go to yourpodcastcoach.com. Literally, there's like 7 different buttons on there for my free 7-day podcast workshop. So if you just go to yourpodcastcoach.com, click on, I want to get started, click on 7-day podcast workshop. What that is it's literally designed to answer 7 of the biggest questions that people have about starting a podcast. And it comes in an email every day for a week. And then from there, there's plenty of opportunities to connect with me. Or if you just want to email me directly, the email that I use that I check on my phone all the time is just hello@yourpodcastcoach.com.
And I got to tell you, people, I mean, listen, I don't have half the resume that Michael has, but I got to tell you, I've been in the business. I've worked with some of the biggest radio shows in Central Florida. And you being able to get this type of advice from a professional, and I do consider Michael Sharkey a professional. I want to get into a little bit. Now, where did you start in radio? Now, the first time I ever heard your name was from one of my favorite program directors of all time, Catherine Brown. Catherine Brown used to talk so highly of, well, not when I say so highly, it says she still does, I'm sure. But what I'm trying to say is that's the first time your name ever came up. You guys worked at She, right?
Yeah, we were
103.
Yes, She 100.3. We did that. That station was
around. What day part were you doing? What day part?
I did afternoon drive. I was on the air 3 to 7 every day.
What was Catherine?
She did. What did she do? She did middays. I think she did. Yeah, she did middays for a while. I think we had kind of one of those weird, like she did like 10 to 1 or something like that. Mm-hmm. I forget. But, she was also the program director at the time. But, she and we did that radio station in Orlando mid to late 90s. That station ended in March of 1999. But prior to that, I mean, I've kind of was in Florida most of my career. Started in Gainesville, Florida.
Really? Really? I mean, is that a great market? You know, that it's one of those college towns.
It's a college market.
I mean,
and it's a great place to start.
What format were you guys playing back then?
So I was doing top 40 when I started. Actually,
really, you did top 40.
I did. I did. I've done every format. I did every format except country. That was the only format. I did AC. I did, obviously, alternative was my staple format. Talk. The only format I didn't do ever was country. I always wanted to because I heard the country listeners were fantastic. But yeah, I got started in 1989 at an all heavy metal AM radio station, which if you can imagine, like Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath
over the AM airwaves.
It was this little signal that was in the middle of the University of Florida campus, but you know, I was 16 years old and it was enough to get started, and it was an amazing adventure. So
when did you start at 97X? Because maybe me being an outsider, I would think that I'd be like, I mean, I think what you did at 102.5 The Bone was great. And I want to get into that because I want to talk about how it was transitioning from working in music radio and then having to be a program director of so many big personalities. It had to be a big adjustment. But when did you start at 97X?
We signed on 97X November 3rd of 2000. I officially started there about 4 weeks later. So, and that was one of those things where it was interesting because nobody gave 97X a chance. It was very much it was only 11,000 watt radio station.
Do you remember the Crow?
Oh, yeah.
In Daytona? Yeah. That was the first radio station I ever worked at. And that's why I love 97X so much. And I'm not trying to compare it, but you guys were playing, we were kind of going the same direction as the Crow was. We were playing a lot of that alternative that you saw in the 90s, but we were mixing in a lot of the new stuff, and we're taking chances because you on 97X, you guys played a lot of music that wasn't getting played on a lot of stations though.
Well, we were technically the first alternative rock radio station in Tampa. So you think about, Tampa, Florida is a top 20 radio market. And obviously you've got a station like 98 Rock that was, had been there and was sort of the foundation rock station, but they weren't going to play. They were playing a little bit of Linkin Park when we signed on, but, we came on and it was like, hey, in 2001, the Strokes came out, the White Stripes came out, all these artists that were like really cool in the alternative space. So we started experimenting with these artists. We started playing Eminem and, people in Tampa were like, what are you doing? What are you doing? But you know what? It was cool though, because it just, what we believed was, people have a wider taste of music than just Nickelback and Kansas.
Yep.
So we were just like, look, let's just try it. If it, we always knew that if we were getting complaints, then we were doing the right thing. And that was very much something that we took a lot of chances. Not all of them worked, but we were able to put Next Big Thing on, and we were able to kind of do that up against what was the 98 Rock Show Livestock.
Yeah.
And
remember we had Earth Day Birthday. We had Earth Day Birthday at JRR over here. But the Next Big Thing that you guys used to do at the park, man, that was something that everybody looked forward to. And you could always catch those new music bands that, were up and coming. And that had to be a big deal dealing with those type of personalities when it came to music and stuff. But your transfer from going from 97X to being the program director, actually you were the program director of both of them at the same time, weren't you?
Of 97X and The Bone? Yes. Yeah, I did that my last 4 years at Cox. From 2010 to 2014, I oversaw both of those radio stations as well as the format captain for all the rock and alternative stations inside Cox Media Group.
Now, like you working in music all your life, it's got to be a testament of what management thought of you at the time. I mean, were you kind of like, what was your first reaction when they said, hey, Michael, we need you to come over and be the program director of 1025 The Bone? What was your first reaction?
Well, interestingly enough, it kind of made sense because when we started 97X back in 2001, somebody who that you probably worked with at Crow, Chris Fisher.
Yes.
We brought Fish on and we brought his sidekick Napoleon on to do mornings. And pretty much, again, the feeling and the sentiment inside Cox at the time was that 97X is never going to succeed. And the other underlying sentiment was you're never going to grow a morning show on this radio station because management won't allow it.
You had two big shows on there, right?
Right.
And I think you bring in Drew Garabo, and Drew was a great hire, and come to find out, he ended up making even a bigger name at 1025 The Bone right now.
Right. And the idea was really just about the development. It's the same. It's the work I'm doing today. It's the development of content over time. And I think that for 97X, we took a morning show with Fisher, and then it became Fisher and Boy many years later, is that over time, we just grew it and grew it and grew it. And I'm always a big believer of, if you tell me it can't be done, I'm going to go do it anyway. So, so when the time came in 2010 to take over 1025 The Bone, at that time it was all talking morning.
That long ago? Man, that it does not seem, man.
Well, I took it over in 2010, but it was still playing classic rock in the middays.
Getting it started.
Nights. Right. And then it was in April of 2012 that it was 24/7 talk. And management came to me and said, hey, look, will you oversee The Bone? Which I was fine with. But then when I went back to them, I said, look, we can do this all day long. We can have a big morning show, big afternoon show, and play Kansas and crap in the middle of the day. But the fact of the matter is that this radio station is a talk radio station. It's just what we're doing is you're just playing music.
Is it that demographic though? Does the classic rock format share the kind of the same demographic that male 25-54?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's just, and I think what's so fascinating is that what we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years is that as podcasts have become so dominating, it just validates what The Bone was doing. It was just validating the fact that it's talk is what people want.
Now, exactly. And I agree with you. So I want to get into the podcasting. There's a lot of things we could tell people what they need to do, but what are maybe could you give me an example of maybe the top 3 mistakes that people that are interested in getting into podcasts make?
I think one of the bigger mistakes is not having good enough quality. Like you and I are doing this over YouTube, or we're doing this over Zoom right now. And this is fine. This is going to be good quality. And you're going to put it on YouTube and you're going to put it on your podcast. And you understand, Tuddle, that you've got to have that right level of quality.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
Now, I'm sorry, but I don't have a board right now. Everything that I do when it comes to editing is post-production. I've tweaked my compression settings. So, I'm getting the right levels. I'm not all over the place and stuff. But I do agree with you, because I hear a lot of great podcasts that have great content, but the quality is not there. Now, you also get people that got great quality, but not great content.
Right. So I think, and again, you can fix the quality conversation in 5 minutes. I mean, it's not a difficult thing. It's just a lot of people sort of just especially because we live in an iPhone world, and you can technically do a podcast with this microphone. It's just, in the case of doing something consistent, you really want to just have slightly better quality. But the other mistakes I see is people rush in without really thinking about it. Again, that's why you got 45% of all podcasts on Apple Podcasts haven't been updated in over a year. Because people sort of jump right in and they're like, yeah, I'm going to do a podcast. And they get 6 episodes in and they don't do it anymore. So what I work with my clients on is, slow down. Let's take 5 minutes, get you a good studio set up. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to spend, the studio I recommend is under $200 and it sounds as good as Joe Rogan's studio. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on it, but then it's really about just making sure before you just get out there and go crazy, setting that plan to say, okay, look, I'm going to do a podcast every week. I mean, you do a podcast every day.
Yeah. Is consistency a big part of it? Because where I saw a big increase on my daily downloads was I just had this bright idea. I'm a big sports fan. I like streaks. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to see how many days in a row that I can do a podcast. And I made it almost 5 months. I even did it on Saturdays and Sundays. Now, I made a thing. It had to at least be a 30-minute podcast to get, for it to count as an official podcast. I try to do, and I shoot anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. But I saw a big increase when I was pitting out stuff on a consistent basis. Is there such a thing? Is there such a thing of oversaturating the market, though?
That's a good question. I think most people don't ever come close to oversaturating. I did, over the summer, I did a new episode every day for 30 days, just because I wanted to do it. Very similar to kind of what you talked about. I wanted to do a new episode every day for 30 days, just to get what it feels like and kind of, work through a lot of stuff with my podcast. I don't need to do it every day. Mm-hmm. Right now, I release my podcast every other week. Going into 2021, I'm going to go back to doing it every week. But I don't think oversaturation becomes an issue, especially as you start to build an audience, because your audience wants to hear from you. Mm-hmm. Your audience, if you do it right, and if you connect with your audience right, they want to hear what it is you have to say, regardless of who you are. I think, interestingly enough, you and I are going to come from the perspective of being inside radio. Whereas inside radio, I was the gatekeeper. I was the program director. I was the one who determined this person got on the radio and this person did not. But the truth of the matter is with podcasts, there's no gatekeeper. Now, there's good and bad to that. The good news is everyone can have a podcast. The bad news is everyone can have a podcast. So there's no gatekeeper. So you can be just as big as the guy down the street. Anybody can kind of be a superstar. So really what it's about is really focusing in on the fundamentals of consistency, of telling that story, of being consistent, not just in how often you release, but being consistent in what it is you're trying to say. Is your podcast about being an entrepreneur? Is your podcast about running a marketing company? Is it about being a chef? So a lot of the people that I work with have, these are people that have no concept of stuff that you and I would have been raised around in radio stations. So I get to show them ideas and insights that help give them confidence. And then it just builds from there. So now this audio form of podcasting allows for normal people to build audiences that are, 10 times the size of some radio shows at this stage.
One of the things that I had to get used to coming from radio, we live and die by the ratings. We're always looking about stuff. And there'd be some days I'm the first guy. One of the first things I look at when I wake up in the morning, I log on to my podcasting hosting site to look at the analytics. And there'll be some days where I'll do really, really well. And there'll be some days where I'm not doing as well. And then I had to think this through, because those days that I did not have a good day when it comes to downloads, I had to get it in my mind that's the thing about podcasting. That's why people like podcasting, is that they get to consume it when they want to consume it. And like those really, really big days, because I also forget, my whole archive is available online. So it could be a new person that stumbles upon my podcast and they're like, all right, I'm going to download every single episode that Tuddle's ever done. Yep. Is that something that people need to get in their head? Just because maybe you don't have a good day, don't let it discourage you, because the next day, because I look at averages. I look at the averages for the week. I don't look at days alone. Is that a good piece of advice?
Yeah, or even just look at the total number. Look at the total number of downloads you've gotten in the last year or the last 6 months, because that tells a bigger story. Yeah, I mean, it's just like ratings. It's like when PPM destroyed, in many ways, destroyed radio, we were able to look at like, oh, this quarter hour was not as good as this quarter hour. And
but that's only but that was only, all right. So give me an idea. I don't want to go into detail because they're, talking about the ratings are sacred, but like when you're talking about podcasts, you're getting real-time stats. Okay.
Right.
You're getting real-time stats. Now, when you're looking at radio ratings, like how many people would one person represent in a market like Tampa? The one person that had a PPM meeting, just off the top of your head, if you had to guess.
I used to know this number actually. Oh gosh.
Is it like I heard it was like 60 or 70,000.
It's not that many, but it's pretty high.
Yeah,
it's pretty high.
Well, what we're just saying is that the ratings, when you're looking at radio, they might not be the most accurate, but when you're looking at podcasting stuff, I really do feel like you're getting a real taste of who's listening and who's not listening.
Yeah. And I will also say that the metrics of podcasts, they're still finding their way. I mean, we still live and die by downloads, and that just simply means it's on somebody's phone. It doesn't
necessarily. Are streams important? Are streams just as important?
Yeah, they can be. It just depends on what you're trying to do with your metrics. I mean, look, I think over the next 12 to 24 months, they're going to get a lot better with analytics for podcasts, especially when you're trying to figure out, models of revenue and things like that. But for somebody that's just getting started, back to your question from a moment ago, is that not to overanalyze that data. You might have, if you're a business owner, let's say you're a business owner and 2 or 3 clients change the scope of your business. Well, you can get that with a podcast. You don't need 100,000 downloads. You don't even need 500 downloads to get that. So I always remind people that it doesn't matter. You don't need Joe Rogan size audience. What you need is the audience that fits what you're doing. I don't get caught up in my own analytics. I'm still going to put my podcast out consistently, and I'm still going to do what I choose to do with it consistently. But if I get, 1,000 downloads this week, if I get 10,000 next week, great. If I get 0 the following week, which that's not going to happen. But at the same time, it's more about understanding the audience of people that you're talking to and how you might best impact those people with your content, whatever your goals are. Again, if it's a daily podcast, if it's a podcast about podcasts, it's just understanding what your goals are. And when you do that, be consistent with your content. And I don't want to say forget about the analytics, definitely want to see the growth, but don't get hung up into it, because it's so easy, as you said, to wake up every day, check your downloads and see how you're doing.
All right. So we're talking about that now. All right. I know a lot of podcasts are niche type podcasts. And it all depends on what you're going to do. Like, if you got a business and you want to talk about your business or promote your business and stuff, going with a niche type podcast, could you be putting yourself in a box? Could you be limiting yourself when it comes to growth of your content that you're putting out?
My answer to that question is no. My answer to that question is that I believe that the riches are in the niches. I believe that if you start on day one and you say, okay, well, I'm going to do a podcast about travel. Well, travel is huge. A client, one of the biggest clients I ever worked with, was so mistaken because they said, we're doing a podcast about food and travel. And I had to sit them down and say, well, that's about 4 billion people on planet Earth. And what you really need to do is discuss specific food or specific travel and really sort of niche it down. So to your question, I think it's better to actually get into a place where your niche is really, really small. It's funny. My podcast helps entrepreneurs confidently create unique podcasts, but I still think sometimes that's too broad. Like, should I get it down to women entrepreneurs, or should I get it down to entrepreneurs who have this type of business? So really it's because once you nail that niche, when you really, 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 really nail what you're talking about, from that point, you can expand. Here's a question for you. Do you know what Gary V?
Yes,
Gary?
I love Gary V.
And, do you know how he started?
All right. Wasn't he like a thrifter going out and doing yard sailing or doing shoes or something? I know he's doing the wine stuff right now, but
Right.
I don't know exactly.
It started with a very specific thing about wine. And I think it was his YouTube channel or whatever. Well, now Gary Vee gets on and talks about marketing or entrepreneurship or people. I mean, people come out of the woodworks. Right. People come out of the woodworks. Yeah, they assume that Gary Vee is this sudden expert on how to run a business, but he's not. But what Gary Vee did right is he nailed his niche. And when he nailed his niche from that point, when he was so consumed and popular in that space, he was able to grow. So that's why I say, really, it's better to start with that niche, get really good at it, and then expand from there.
I'm glad that you brought up Gary Vee, and because my next question is with social media, what is the best way? Because with social media, people go to social media to get entertained, to get content. How do you promote your podcast without making it seem like your Twitter or your social media is becoming an infomercial page? Are you posting clips? Are you doing promos like we used to do, posting those, giving those people pieces of stuff like that? I mean, what is the best way that you have found of being able to promote your podcasting content on your social media platforms without it being an infomercial?
Yeah, it's funny. That's the lesson I learned back in 2015. Is every time I put out a new episode, I was on Twitter with it, I was on Facebook with it. And what I saw the listening start to diminish because as you said, it turned into an infomercial. What I like is when people put it's rules of radio, little snippets of your podcast, use it on Instagram. There's all sorts of different tools that you can use right now, like the Headliner app that'll put a little bit of video there or a little bit of an image with a little bit of audio. But I always tell people, don't overthink it. Just understand that for most people, most of us do not have a team of social media people working for us. For most of us, we're doing it all ourselves.
Gary Vee helped me out. He came out with this stack showing you how to simplify social media. I'll have to share it with you. I'm sure you've already seen it. But it was just talking, like, for example, this is just if you're on Instagram and you're on Twitter, if you want to kill two birds with one stone, send out a tweet, take a screenshot of that tweet, crop it, post it on your Instagram. You're getting two posts. He shows you because he admits, he's like, yeah, I got a lot of people helping me with content and stuff. But for the beginner, this is how you can streamline your social media.
Yeah, a lot of what I teach people kind of stepping away from social media is how to use YouTube and your podcast, using transcription for your website. Just really, because a lot of people that I work with, they sort of look at sort of their social space and then the creation of content space on YouTube and podcasts, and their website and blogs is different. So a lot of the work that I end up doing is helping people, again, very basic principle. If you sort of take your podcast audio, do what we're doing now, record a Zoom, you can upload that to YouTube, you can transcribe your podcast, which then becomes a 4,000 word blog, which helps people find your website. And again, very similar to what Gary Vee said, is you're just basically taking the same thing and you're repurposing it across other channels.
Or the format specific.
Right. The other thing that you can do is on your tweet, just link to your Instagram post. I mean, it shows up like a link, but it's still, when somebody clicks on it, now they've been introduced to your Instagram.
On the line with me right now is my former program director, Michael Sharkey. Has plenty of experience in terrestrial radio, but the guy is, what I've seen so far, it seems like he's helping out a lot of people right now. How important is the description when you're posting a podcast do for helping people discover your podcast? So are descriptions, detailed descriptions, tags, are those important?
What I find that the biggest things that are important is in specifically your podcast, your thumbnail artwork that you have for your podcast, not per episode, but for your podcast is important. It's got to look good. Just got to look professional. So like I said, I work with a lot of business people. So I tell them, just You don't have to spend a lot of money, but that little thumbnail image just needs to look professional.
Thumbnails on YouTube. Like
Right.
just like, people, I didn't realize this, but I was doing a lot of research and thumbnails, catchy thumbnails that catches people's eye and they'll check it out. I know it sounds stupid.
No, it's not actually it's an interesting statistic, but when it comes to discoverability of podcasts, is that your name, your artwork, and your description. It was a Canadian media company did a research on it. There's like over 50% of people discover podcasts just thumbing through. Hey, I like this. I like this thumbnail more than this thumbnail. So I'm going to go check out this podcast. So again, you don't have to make it, you don't have to spend thousands of dollars on some fancy graphic art, but that little thumbnail makes a huge difference in just a sense of professionalism. And then your description that you write for your podcast is also very important. But the big secret that I always tell people is make sure that somewhere in your description, and then with every episode that you put out, you put your name. Because oftentimes people, if you say, hey, look, search for, a great example is my podcast. My podcast is called Your Podcast Coach. So 2 of the words of my 3 words are podcast and coach. Well, that's going to open up all sorts of podcasts in the podcast store. It's going to open up all sorts of coaches. So what I always do is say, hey, search Michael Sharkey. And you search Michael Sharkey and I'm number 1. So if you put your name in there, if you put your name in the description, if you put your name in the title, people will search by your name. And then you're always guaranteed to come up first.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me, like, why people, because I always think it's ridiculous when people talk about themselves in the third person. But like, whenever I put a post up on social media, like Tuddle interviews such and such, and people, how trolls can be on radio. They're like, why are you talking about yourself in the third person? And I'm like, well, that, when people search Tuddle, that stuff is going to come up.
That's smart. And one piece of advice is don't worry about trolls. They're not going anywhere. Yeah. They're here to stay, but that's what they do. So yeah, but I think to your point is that's a very effective way to do it because you're putting your name in there. You're branding. It's just branding. Think about radio. What do we do in radio? We say the names of radio stations over and over and over and over again.
Well, look at Real Radio. Well, Real Radio. I always remember that jingle, that Real Radio 104, everybody, it's smart because everybody remembers that jingle. It's all about branding.
Yep. So it's the same thing. So I don't have a problem with that at all.
Man, Shark, I could sit here and talk to you for a while, and I want to have you on again. I hope you enjoyed this interview. I was actually really nervous about doing this because, like, I really, really do have a lot of respect for you. And out of all the program directors that I've ever been fired for, you were by far the nicest. I deserved it that day. But you were really, really cool about it. And you're one of the program directors that I could actually tell cared. Like you didn't enjoy having to do the dirty work because you knew all the people that were working under you were passionate about what we were all doing. We all had one goal and you had a boss you had to answer to, but you were not cold or you didn't like come with no feelings. Like I could tell like, oh man, this really sucks. But I really did learn a lot from you. I think the greatest piece of advice you gave me, because I know I was good at what I did, but you were like, listen, check out, just give it a listen. Listen to Seth Cush. Listen to Seth. He is very concise. He's calculated. And when he does talk, he has something to offer. And there was a lot of times in radio where I just would spout off about something and I'd be like, did that really like push the conversation forward? And that was like one of the best pieces of advice that any program director has ever given me. So thank you.
You're very welcome. It's funny when we talked at the very beginning about, certain things that translate. A lot of the shows that I work with now that have 2 people and couple of them have 3, a lot of those same types of lessons hold true. When you get 3 people in a room, oftentimes that third person if they come really strong with one or two sentences here and there, they can make a huge difference. But oftentimes, when people don't know what they don't know, it's just like, oh, well, this person's going to talk for a while and this person's going to talk for a while. And it just becomes hard to listen to. So I appreciate you pointing that out. And like I said, it's just, it's a joy to still continue to do what I get to do. But now, I loved my career in radio. It was amazing. It was awesome. I feel like I was able to kind of exit the way I wanted to exit. I still have a lot of friends in radio. I know 2020 has been a really tough year for so many people. There's been so many firings. But I like this sort of, I don't want to call it a new chapter. It's just, it made logical sense. It's just that podcasts are so exciting right now. And it's so much fun to be a part of something, not just like you and I are doing now, creating something, but being able to kind of take that program director role for writers, authors, software engineers, glass artists, and all these people that I get to work with every day. So thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Tell people once again, if they want to find out and get some help from you, where can they check out your stuff?
Sure. My website is yourpodcastcoach.com. Again, if you just go to yourpodcastcoach.com, upper right-hand corner, you'll see free 7-day workshop. Click into that. You'll get an email every day. Just, again, it helps you answer some of the big questions about podcast. But if you want to email at any point, my email is pretty simple. It's just hello@yourpodcastcoach.com. And that email comes right to my phone and I check it all the time.
All right, Sharkey, I hope you have a great holiday. I hope you and your wife are fine. And if there's anything you ever need, please reach out.
You bet. Thanks, Tuddle.